Netanyahu appeared to play it cautiously on China, avoiding a direct attack on Beijing just days before Trump's high-stakes meeting with Xi Jinping. "I also have a closed mouth when necessary," is the kind of message Netanyahu seemed to send as he steered carefully around questions on China's role in backing Iran. The Israeli Prime Minister was pressed by a journalist over China's support for Iran during the war, putting Beijing's balancing act squarely into the spotlight. "I don't want to speak for China" captures the careful line Netanyahu appeared to take, as Israel weighed how hard to publicly push Beijing before the Trump-Xi talks. Trump is set to meet the Chinese president with Iran, nuclear diplomacy, Taiwan, and trade all expected to be on the agenda in Beijing. Trump will be meeting one of Iran's top diplomatic backers even as America's closest regional partner, Israel, appears to be reassessing how publicly dependent it wants to look on Washington. Netanyahu has hinted that Israel may be prepared to rely less on US backing even as tensions with Iran continue to shape the regional security environment. The Israeli Prime Minister also spoke about China's support for Iran during the recent war, suggesting Beijing's role remains part of Israel's wider strategic concern. Netanyahu made those remarks during an interview with CBS News correspondent Major Garrett.
"I'd like to ask you about what you know about China providing materially valuable military support to what remains of the Iranian regime. True,
China gave certain amount of support and particular components of missile manufacturing, but I can't say more than that.
Does that disturb you?
Well, I didn't like it.
'Cause it's apparently doing it right now."
Could be. I don't want to speak for China. I don't want to speak also.
But you have eyes and ears on this.
For president? Yeah, well, but I also have a closed mouth when necessary. American military aid to Israel has enjoyed bipartisan consensus for decades. It is now $3.8 billion per year and subject to new political scrutiny because of shifting public attitudes about Israel and foreign aid in general.
Do you believe it's time for the state of Israel to re-examine and possibly reset its financial relationship to the United States? Meaning, what the United States provides to Israel on an annual basis.
Absolutely. And I've said this to President Trump. I've said it to our own people. Their jaws dropped, but I said, look.
What do you mean? What are you saying?
I want to draw down to zero the American financial support, the financial component of the military cooperation that we have, because we receive $3.8 billion a year. And I think that it's time that we weaned ourselves from the remaining military support.
Can you give me a timetable?
I said, let's start now and do it over the next decade, over the next 10 years. But I want to start now. I don't want to wait for the next Congress. I want to start now. Unquote.
Netanyahu also appeared to acknowledge that support for Israel is slipping among sections of the American public. CBS News cited a Pew survey showing that 60% of US adults held an unfavorable view of Israel. The Gaza war and its mounting death toll were cited in US media coverage as major factors behind the decline in public support. Netanyahu, however, appeared to place much of the reputational damage on the role of social media. He described the online backlash as the eighth front of the war, underscoring how seriously Israel's leadership now sees the information battle. The leaders of the world's two biggest economies are also reportedly set to meet for the first time in 6 months. Trump is expected to arrive in Beijing on May 13th, ahead of talks reportedly scheduled for May the 14th and 15th. Reuters reported that Trump and Xi are expected to discuss Iran tensions, Taiwan, nuclear arms, and artificial intelligence. The two sides are also said to be preparing announcements or discussions around agriculture purchases, trade, and investment forums. The meeting comes at a time of rising friction between the US and Iran, along with stalled peace efforts. Iran's envoy to China has also stressed that any agreement with the US would require guarantees. Iran has submitted a sweeping counterproposal aimed at ending the conflict with the United States and Israel, laying out detailed conditions for a broader regional settlement. According to Iranian state-linked media, Tehran delivered the proposal on May 10 through mediator Pakistan, formalizing its position in the ongoing ceasefire and peace talks. The plan calls for an end to hostilities across all fronts, including the Israel-Lebanon border and the wider Gulf, while seeking explicit guarantees that the US and its allies will not launch fresh attacks. Iran also demanded war-related compensation, including reparations for damage caused by sanctions and military pressure, and demanded recognition of its sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. Tehran further called for the release of its frozen overseas assets and a short-term relief on oil export restrictions to ease the impact of the sanctions regime. Iran asked the U.S. Office of Foreign Assets Control to suspend sanctions on Iranian oil sales for 30 days, presenting this as a confidence-building measure during the negotiation phase. The proposal also demanded an end to the naval blockade around its ports and key maritime trade routes, arguing that the blockade has caused major economic disruption. Sources told Iranian media that the counterproposal includes a clause on Iranian management of the Strait of Hormuz, giving Tehran a central role in controlling and monitoring traffic. Washington has repeatedly rejected any Iranian-led control over the Strait of Hormuz, describing the idea of Tehran managing the choke point as unacceptable and a threat to global shipping. The Iranian proposed framework reportedly includes a 30-day negotiation period after ceasefire takes hold, during which both sides would work toward converting a temporary truce into a more permanent settlement. Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal reported that Iran could be open to temporarily pausing uranium enrichment as part of an interim deal. However, Tehran is said to be willing to accept only a far shorter pause than the 20-year suspension that the US has reportedly proposed in its own draft plan. Iran also reportedly rejected any demand to dismantle or cap the number of its nuclear facilities, insisting that its nuclear infrastructure remains a sovereign right. US President Donald Trump reportedly fumed over Iran's counterproposal, posting on Truth Social that he considered its terms totally unacceptable despite the existing ceasefire. Trump said he had reviewed the proposal and rejected its core elements outright, including Iran's demand for control over the Strait of Hormuz and the scale of sanctions relief. Trump's strong rejection came as he told Axios that he spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on May 10. Donald Trump said, and I quote, "I don't like their letter. It's inappropriate. I don't like their response. Iran has been tapping along many nations for 47 years. Iran talks are my situation, not everybody else's." Unquote. Meanwhile, Iranian officials insisted the plan was based on defending Iran's rights and sovereignty, rather than accommodating US red lines. A source told Tasnim that the negotiating team was not drafting proposals to please Trump, but to ensure Iran's security and economic interests were protected. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian reiterated that dialogue does not mean surrender, stressing that talks are a tool of diplomacy, not concession. In a statement on Sunday, Pezeshkian declared that Iran would never bow down to the enemy, framing the counterproposal as a firm but conditional path toward ending the war.